BBC.
The WHO describes the figures as sobering.
It is a staggering number, and it is a very tragic.
We're live in Kiev, where families take to the streets calling for soldiers at the besieged Mariupol steelworks to be on impact.
Undercounted the number of lives lost to the pandemic.
50% of deaths are not registered by the government as COVID-19. Our NGO brings bodies to be
National experts to calculate the global death toll due to the crisis. In the first 2 years of the pandemic worldwide, it was thought around 5.5 million people died from COVID. But because of the World Health Organization now thinks that figure might be more like 15 million.
It's a tragedy. This is a staggering number. And it is important for us to honor the lives, to be better prepared for the next time.
Some countries stand out. The estimate for excess deaths in Russia is 3.5 times its official count. In India, the WHO believes death calculations. In Africa, countries like Somalia only had sketchy data, so the experts admit there's a lot of uncertainty about how many may have died.
Urgently, we need better data collection systems.
Such as the US, Britain, Spain and Germany all had excess mortality rates above the global average in this crisis. A reminder that the pandemic was tough even for the wealthiest countries on the planet.
Now to Professor Devi Sridhar, Chair of Global Public Health at the University of Edinburgh. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us here on the programme. These numbers have been described as staggering, and frankly, they are. You know, if they're 3 times more than what was estimated, 15 million.
Yeah, it's a very high number, and it shows that this is the deadliest pandemic that we've had since 1918. And if we compare this to other infectious disease threats, the annual 100,000 deaths. So you can see that COVID-19 has taken many more lives than other infectious disease deaths like flu, but even things like malaria, HIV, or TB as well.
Could it be that we're just better at calculating the numbers now?
In 2020 and 2021, and what are the deaths registered now? And in a sense, we can get the sense of the loss, not just from COVID, but from health services being overrun, hospitals being overrun, and people dying because they couldn't get care, which again is an impact of the pandemic and the disease, but in an pandemic and least able to get medical care. But of course, governments are cagey. There have been comparisons made between countries, and there's of course a political imperative to say, oh, we've done well. So of course, when these numbers come out, politicians don't like them, because it shows in some ways
scrambling to figure out how to approach this deadly virus?
I think it's a mix of several different factors. I mean, I think the first was those countries that tried to delay infections into the future, but with not restrictive policies such as locking people in their homes. And it could at the very start.
Dr. Devi Sridhar, thank you so much for your analysis and for joining us here on the programme. Now let's go back to Ukraine, where fighting continues around the Azovstal steelworks in the eastern Donbas region. Let's cross live to my colleague now, Ben Brown, who joins us from Kyiv. Ben, over to you.
Yeah, Yalda, thank you very much indeed. It looks like it may be the end game there at the Azovstal steel plant, because Ukraine says Russian forces have launched an all-out assault. In fact, it's saying there's a 3-day corridor for civilians to be evacuated from there. Here's our correspondent, Joe Inwood.
We could be entering the last days of the battle for Mariupol. The Azovstal steelworks, where Ukrainian fighters contain the pressure of the enemy.
The situation is extremely difficult, but no matter what, we continue to carry out the order to hold the defence.
In short, the fight for Azovstal will be a fight to the death. But it's not just Ukraine. More than 200 civilians are also thought to be sheltering there. Russia has announced a temporary ceasefire for a few hours each day to let them escape. The Ukrainians say they want the same thing. We hope forces to take part in the assault on the Donbass. So far, progress south is reported to be very slow and uneven, while movement north has been paused altogether. That could be because the Donbass is where main oil depot in occupied Donetsk. This war is as much about logistics as anything else, and both sides are drawing blood. Joe Inwood, BBC News, Lviv.
Well, at that Azovstal steel plant, it is what the outcome is going to be. And some of the wives of those fighters in the steel plant have been demonstrating in the centre of Kyiv here today. One of them is Natalia Zaritska, who was pleading with the international community to help her husband. And
it's really terrible, and it is really really critical right now. They are dying each minute. Please help.
Basements of the steelworks, and from what I've heard this morning, they are still fighting. The Russian military are trying to attack the remnants of the factory and trying to get in, but they are well informed.
And in the midst of that are these civilians who are still there, including children.
Yes, the horrible situation about it is that there are still a few hundred people underneath. They're trying to survive. Working for a while. I mean, the other day they evacuated 18 buses. We were very anxious when only 3 buses managed their way to the city of Zaporizhia, and we were very anxious while we couldn't hear anything from the.
Intensifying attacks, especially on infrastructure around this country.
Yes, sure, because the upcoming holiday in Russia, the 9th of May, which is considered to be the holiday of victory, and Putin has to present control of the towns and villages in between the Donetsk and the Lugansk regions, and also around Kharkiv. The Ukrainian army has launched a few counterattacks, and they have been quite successful so far. They managed to regain control of 4 villages.
Much. Now stay with us here on Impact. Still to come, swathes of agricultural land underwater as the Spanish region of Valencia experiences record-breaking rainfall, damaging homes and causing transport chaos.
A force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature, she is warm, nurturing and loving. P-Mark mustard oil has always followed in nature's footsteps, extracting mustard oil using completely natural methods.
Hoods of the city, leaving homes and businesses completely waterlogged. Wendy Urquhart reports.
This used to be a road, now it's a river. Dozens of cars were swallowed up as floodwaters surged through the city's neighbourhoods. We're bailing out water for 4 hours, says another. Firefighters faced an uphill struggle as they tried to rescue drivers who were stranded in their cars. The horrendous weather forced the authorities to shut down several roads in Valencia. Weather-wise, it's supposed to be dry and sunny for the next few days, which will give people a chance to clean up the mess that the floods have left behind. But they're unlikely to be able to salvage much because everything is completely waterlogged.
Where the Supreme Court has rejected an appeal by the deposed former leader Aung San Suu Kyi against a 5-year sentence for corruption, which was handed down last week. She had already been sentenced to 6 years in jail and still faces In some areas, people in Northern Ireland are choosing a new assembly. And a series of tornadoes have left a trail of destruction in the U.S. state of Oklahoma. A number of buildings were damaged, but there aren't any reports of injuries. Thousands of people. And now it's been given an African flavour courtesy of British Ghanaian artist Larry Achiampong. Daniel Dadzi reports.
This is the network service update from the control room at Westminster.
It's a busy morning at has become the home of a new artwork based on the ubiquitous underground sign. The artist who created it, British Ghanaian Larry Achiampong.
My mind really exploded because to be the first artist to show
represents the country's independence struggle, mineral resources and natural environment, with the 54 black stars representing the number of countries in the African continent. His work was commissioned by the Art on the Underground project. His award-winning work includes films, photography, sculptures and painting. He draws inspiration from his parents who migrated from Ghana in the 1980s.
You know, my mum would tell me stories as a kid about, you know, the likes of Yasan.
Will inspire an African artistic revolution at home and across the world. Daniel Dazi, BBC News, Westminster.
Okay, now a BBC investigation has found scam are stealing from donors and the vulnerable people the charities are trying to help. Angus Crawford reports.
Out of war, chaos. Ukrainian refugees needing shelter and safety. Feeding off the destruction, fake.
There's no charity registration number, and as for the address of the head office, it doesn't even exist.
But there is a phone number.
I just wanted to ask you a quick question about what the money's being spent on.
Here's another. It's stolen the logo of Save the Children and one of their videos.
So does this make you angry?
Yeah, it absolutely does. We've got the generosity of the British public, which is being taken advantage of.
It's kit to soldiers on the front line.
It's worst thing which you can do person. Then in your country dying little children, in your country now all in fire.
So who's behind these sites and where are they? Take Save Life Nigeria.
It says it's raising money for Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not, is it? It's not raising any money for Ukraine.
Nations to Ukraine. But after we spoke, he took the website down. For Ukrainians, the war brings misery. For scammers, it's just another opportunity to make money. Angus Crawford, BBC News.
We'll be back in 30 minutes' time with all the latest headlines. You can get in touch with me on Twitter. I'm at BBC Yalda Hakim. Business News coming up next, and I'll be back in half an hour.
Days. Meanwhile, across the south of India, we've got a trough that's going to be bringing some heavy showers and thunderstorms over the next couple of days into central areas of Asia. We've got temperatures tending to climb across Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. We're looking at highs into the upper 20s into the middle of next week, so becoming hotter here. In Tashkent, fine, settled, sunny, getting hotter this weekend. Showers and thunderstorms next week.
Earth. To respond and to adapt takes ideas, hope, and inspiration. BBC Media Action connects people, shares experiences, builds knowledge. Follow us now.
देश के हर पल कभी परछाई बनके कभी विश्वास बनके देश के हर पल में रहते हैं
1956 से आज तक LIC हर पल आपके साथ।
a ceasefire. The Kremlin insists a humanitarian corridor at the site is functioning. Fresh shortages of fuel in Sri Lanka have led to long queues at petrol stations, crippling financial problems, and a dire shortage of foreign reserves have led to calls for the government to
Now on BBC World News, the latest business news from across the globe. World Business Report.
And the cost of living crisis bites. And the US Fed joins other central banks and raises interest rates, attempting to cool inflation. Welcome to World Stick in many throats as people around the world suffer from the cost of living crisis. Well, earlier I spoke to energy analyst Dr. Carol Nackley about whether this will attract higher taxes.
Usually when you have prices, oil prices increasing, I would have to reduce the taxes should profits shrink later on. And in the North Sea in particular, who are the major players? It's not the big oil companies. These are much smaller players that have been sustaining production in the North Sea. So for me, the only way I believe to reduce.
Now, more evidence of the cost of living crisis as the world's biggest central bank has hiked the cost of borrowing, attempting to curb inflation. The US Fed raised interest rates by 0.5 percentage point late on Wednesday, which was widely expected by many analysts.
Have been saying that, look, the Federal Reserve has been a little bit slow in starting to raise interest rates, and that's why you have inflation as high as it is. So the Federal Reserve really needs to do something about inflation, and the best way possible is to raise interest rates. But the challenge, of course, is that it needs to be able to raise interest rates to curb inflation, but not raise them too fast that the U.S. ends up falling into a really deep, dark recession. And remember, if the U.S. falls into a recession.
Impact of rate rises. What sort of how many more rate rises are we expecting this year? What are the markets expecting there?
Right. So remember, we haven't seen a rate rise by 0.5 percentage point since of America's central bank, Jerome Powell, made it very clear in the press conference on Wednesday that there is no talk of any kind of 0.75% rate rise, that we're not going to see an even bigger jump. That said, you can expect point in the coming meetings.
Samira, thank you very much for that. Turkey is another country which is being hit by the cost of living crisis too. Prices soared by almost 70% from April last year. Food and transport prices saw the sharpest rise. Reluctance to raise interest rates, a tool usually used to help lower prices. Our business reporter Victoria Craig was recently in Istanbul and explained how tough daily life was for its people.
We were there back in December. Inflation afford it. They have a brand new baby. The mother was ending her maternity leave in December. Now, a few months later, she doesn't have a job to go back to. They have been unable to buy many of the basic goods that they once were able to buy. Illustration of just how difficult it is and how expensive it is for people to make ends meet is that these people are relying on their family in other parts of Turkey who own farms, who are sending them food every month because they just can't afford the prices at the grocery store anymore.
It's been a busier time for Thiago and Daniela. They have been relentlessly scouting for pot villas for wealthy Russian clients that are moving to Dubai in large numbers. There is an influx of billionaires and entrepreneurs who are looking for a new home.
Not just as an investment, but also to relocate to Dubai. So not just the increase on people buying, but people that are actually renting the short term, but they are coming to Dubai with the purpose of finding a new home.
We spoke to several real estate over the last 1 month. The UAE hasn't criticized Russia's invasion of Ukraine, nor has it imposed sanctions on Moscow. It is also providing visas to non-sanctioned Russians. This has encouraged many firms based in Russia to relocate their employees to Dubai. One of them is Fuad Fatulev, who runs a blockchain technology company. He had to shift hundreds of employees from his home country, Russia,
continue several operations because we had to move a lot of people outside of the countries, moved a lot of people outside of Ukraine, moved a lot of people outside of Russia. You know, it's a more environmentally business-friendly place to be here in UAE.
Coming their way.
For now, Dubai has emerged as a safe harbor for wealthy Russians moving out of the country. But whether it can offer protection against Western sanctions in the long term remains to be seen. Samir Hashmi, BBC News, Dubai.
वही स्वाद, नया अंदाज, अमूल चीज, ये मेरा चीज है।
कल आज और कल में देश के हर पल में, कल आज और कल में देश के हर पल में, कभी परछाई बन के
and uncompromising, a force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature, she is warm, nurturing and loving. P-Mark mustard oil has always followed in nature's footsteps, extracting mustard oil using completely natural.
Today.
Hello, I'm Hugh Ferris. This is Sport Today. We are live. Welcome to the programme. Champions Leagues are all the rage right now, and it's not just in Europe. The CONCACAF competition has just been settled by Seattle, with the Sounders becoming the first Major League Soccer team to win the trophy since a new format was introduced. This then the scene.
You know, I'm just super, super proud of the way the team performed throughout this tournament under some adversity. It's not an easy tournament to win. And then, you know, a lot of people were asked.
Then an extra time penalty from Karim Benzema took them through to a 19th Champions League final. Then they will play Liverpool, a repeat of the 2019 match, which Real won in a game you might remember, including Mo Salah going off injured after a challenge by Sergio Ramos. That might go some way.
Yeah, one moment, it's like we've been thinking maybe we shouldn't prepare because you cannot prepare against that. Against Liverpool, which for me is right now is the best team in the world. They showed it in the Premier League from being like whatever 15 points away they were from the top.
Of the Europa League on Thursday, with the possibility of both an all-British and all-German final. Scottish champions Rangers host RB Leipzig, with the Bundesliga side leading 1-0 from their first leg. And West Ham are 2-1 behind ahead of their second leg in Frankfurt against Eintracht.
It's huge for MD, so big for me as well. I want to take the team to the final. I'm preparing the team to go to the final, where we believe that, no, if we get it right, we can do so. So we have to manage that.
This is another chapter in the story, you know. So for us, it's our main objective is to just keep the story of this club going, and let's see, like we did in the FA Cup.
As veteran point guard Chris Paul led the charge. He turns 37 on Friday. You'd never know it. He combined with Devin Booker to score a whopping 58 points on the night. The scores were close until the fourth quarter when the Suns broke open the game. The Mavs had no answer for Paul, whose 14 points late on effectively sealed the win. Dallas now have their work cut out to stay in the series. They do at least have home court advantage for Game 3 on Friday. So here's what Devin Booker had.
Since I was 7 or 8 or 2 years old. Relax. Nah. But, you know, just more than what he's doing on the court, just watching, you know, how he carries himself and just being a sponge to that, you know, seeing his routine, how he takes care of his body. And it's fun to be a part of.
Well, over in Miami, the Heat also have a 2-0 lead after strolling to a 119-103 victory over Philadelphia. Bam Adebayo was Miami's top scorer with 23. The 76ers 8 wins. They were beaten 2-1 by Toronto. Matt Chapman kicked things off with a home run for the Blue Jays. This hit from Vladimir Guerrero Jr. then allowed Bo Bichette to score the winning run for the hosts. It was a bad night for the Yankees, which ended with manager Aaron. Also, a big defeat for the Red Sox. One of the games of Wednesday night was in Los Angeles, where the Angels came from behind to beat the Red Sox 10-5. Jared Walsh sealed the win with a 3-run homer in the 10th inning. Phoenix, where Diamondbacks pitcher Madison Bumgarner was thrown out of the game with the Miami Marlins. Bumgarner having his hand checked for a foreign substance when words were exchanged with the first base umpire. He then had to be restrained by his teammates. The Diamondbacks went on to win the game. That Marlins game. He wasn't the only driver associating with another sport as well. Lewis Hamilton, the man Verstappen beat to the F1 title last season, has been out playing golf with the NFL quarterback Tom Brady. They were in a team together at a charity event. The race is the first of two.
Good one.
Finally, Andy Murray was forced to pull out of his match against Novak Djokovic at the Madrid Open earlier because of illness. Murray was scheduled to play the world #1 in the third round of the event. He was in good form as well, having beaten the 2020 US Open champion Dominic Thiem and Canada's Denis Shapovalov. Sport. From me, Hugh Ferris, and the rest of the team here, it's goodbye for now.
Nature, all-powerful and uncompromising, a force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature, she is warm, nurturing, and purity and quality, and leaving the rest to nature. Because when we live in harmony with nature, life can be great.
The mustard specialist since 1933. Barso se sarso.
कल आज और कल में देश के हर पल में को सच्चाई के रंग से सजाते हैं मुश्किलें कोई हरदम साथ निभाते हैं कल आज और कल में रहते हैं देश के हर पल.
For in-depth analysis.
The impact on Europe and the rest of the world would be devastating.
And correspondents covering both home and global events.
Get a deeper understanding and find out what is really going on.
BBC World News America.
Is lost from the pandemic. It's a time for observing and learning. Some films have done very well at the box office, others have not. So here's an update on the latest state of affairs at the box office.
We had planned ahead on it. It was, they appreciated the incentive to get here. And so it was a success.
Spider-Man No Way Home, one of the highest grossing films in years, released last December.
Summer at the box office. And that's a very bold statement considering where we've been over the past couple of years, almost more than 2 years.
In America, at least, a slew of big titles are being readied to be rolled out in from around the world animated.
They are just so excited. They said that it was moving. They said they cried. They know Mission Impossible, but this was Top Gun, and I think it's going to be very, very big.
Everywhere, All at Once, starring Michelle Yeoh.
Mrs. Wang. Mrs. Wang, are you with us? I am paying attention.
This action story, set in a multiverse, shows that audiences will return to art houses for certain kinds of movies.
I think we're going to see a lot more of that.
I just want to share with you.
Are we ever going to see a return to what used to happen at movie theaters? I don't know if we will. The adult audience is what's missing and what they need.
Hello, this is Impact. I'm Yalda Hakim. The World Health Organization says we'll be live in Delhi to speak to veteran journalist Barka Dutt, who lost her father to the virus. Also on the program, Ukraine says Russia is trying to destroy its troops and is violating a promised 3-day ceasefire at the plant. Back to the program. The World Health Organization has just released a report estimating that 15 million deaths occurred globally due to the pandemic, around triple the current estimates. It has called the figures staggering. Our global health correspondent Naomi Grimley reports.
In the global chaos of COVID, makeshift funeral pyres and hasty burials around the world have become all too familiar. But have some countries undercounted the number of lives
registered by the government as COVID-19? Our NGO brings bodies to be cremated directly from homes of victims. The government only counts related deaths of victims who die in a hospital.
The World Health Organization during lockdowns. The World Health Organization now thinks that figure might be more like 15 million.
It's a tragedy. This is a staggering number, and it is important for us to opportunity to be better prepared for the next time.
Some countries stand out. The estimate for excess deaths in Russia is 3.5 times its official count. In India, the WHO like Somalia only had sketchy data, so the experts admit there's a lot of uncertainty about how many may have died.
Urgently, we need better data collection systems. It's a disgrace that people can be born and die and have no record of their passing, so we really need to invest in countries' registration systems so we can get accurate and timely data.
This report confirms that places such as the US, Britain, Spain and Germany all had excess mortality rates above. Naomi Grimley, BBC News.
And India has previously tried to dismiss the report, but the experts involved say it's important for future pandemic preparedness to get the real figures. From Delhi, Davina Gupta told me more.
Present the correct methodology. The statement says, though they do not want to dispute the result, they do dispute the methodology used in calculating these numbers, which are clearly 10 times more than the official estimates here. The government maintains that COVID figures released by the Ministry of Health, where the methodology still, interestingly, is not clear of how they arrived at even 500,000 figure.
Yeah, and that's the point, right, Davina? They're criticising the WHO for the methodology, but the Indian government
side, the non-government organization officials who are working to help give a dignified burial to those families who had lost their loved ones. And they clearly said that there was no record keeping of these people who had lost their lives, people who were dying in the hospitals as for such kind of emergency that may arise from coronavirus if there is a continued wave here.
Davina Gupta reporting there, and we'll be speaking to TV journalist Barka Dutt in a moment. Let's go to Sri Lanka now, station in the capital, Colombo.
These long queues with people braving the harshest sun and even rain, waiting in hours to get supplies of fuel because of the shortage of fuel and cooking gas has been the biggest sticking 40%. Prices of diesel are up by 138%, and that is pinching citizens on the ground, and this is what requires immediate attention, and that's why what's happening in the parliament is very crucial. The country needs to have monetary fund can go through, or discussions with the lenders can go through. At this point in time, credit line of about $500 million from India is helping Sri Lanka get some supplies of fuel, but that's again a credit line and a long-term
Father to the virus during that time in April 2021, a death she says did not need to happen. She joins us live now from Delhi. Barka, always good to see you. I mean, we're talking about excess deaths of the COVID pandemic. This report by the WHO was delayed. Just tell us what you saw.
Thanks for having me, Yalda. And yes, the WHO report basically tells us that 8 times more Indians have died than the official figures tell us. From my travels across India, I can say that these deaths were never registered as COVID deaths. There were other Indians, poor Indians who lived in the villages of India who had no access to an RT-PCR test. If you did not have a COVID test result, even if you died from COVID features, from COVID symptoms, you were not counted. And COVID-like symptoms in small villages and hamlets. And these were never counted because there was so much stigma associated with COVID that the villagers didn't report them. I also took a boat down the river Ganga, the biggest and the most revered river of India, and chronicled bodies in gaping mismatch between what the officials were telling us and how many people were dying. And therefore, it is extremely tragic that India does not want a transparent debate around how many have died. Now, of course, we know this is a global phenomenon. The WHO report tells keep saying that people are not numbers. And now, as a lady who lost her father to oxygen shortage in a hospital told me, are we not even numbers?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at those images of you with your father. You have often talked about
his oxygen levels had plummeted and he never made it out of the hospital alive, Yalda. And I struggle with that every single day of my life and probably will for the rest of my life. And then I think of those who couldn't even get their fathers inside of hospitals. I don't know if the number is 8 times higher, but I know it's significantly higher than what we're being told.
Yeah, I mean, we saw the utter chaos in places like Delhi, where there was a spotlight, in places like Mumbai. But you're talking about some of these most remote places.
And the actual numbers. I know the government has argued that there's nothing dramatic in the COVID figures, and I, with respect, completely disagree with what the government has articulated here. And I know for saying it on BBC, the government will be pricklier and will believe that I didn't have reporting. We saw in every village that we went to a sharp spike in the number of deaths that the village panchayats, those are the local government bodies, were reporting at their local cremation grounds. We saw bodies abandoned outside hospitals. We saw children. The least we can do is to not be prickly and not link this to some sort of fake notion of nationalism. In fact, as nationalists, we should be demanding that every single Indian who died in these pandemic years must and should be counted.
Baraka, thank you so much for joining us.
कल आज और कल में देश के हर पल में कल आज और कल में बन के उम्मीदों को सच्चाई के रंग से सजाते हैं मुश्किलें कोई हरदम साथ निभाते हैं कल आज और कल में रहते हैं
हर पल आपके साथ
Get live ball-by-ball cricket coverage on the BBC Sport website and app across all forms of the game. For live coverage and the latest stats and
evacuate civilians by violating a promised 3-day ceasefire. Sviatoslav Palama said people were being forced to hide from shelling underground. My colleague Ben Brown is in Kiev and can give us the latest.
Looks like it may be the are still thought to be sheltering inside there, 30 children amongst them and 2,000 troops. Now, Ukrainian commander in charge of those troops who are holed up inside Azovstal is saying that Russian troops have now entered the plant as they try to crush.
Steelworks, where Ukrainian fighters are making their final stand, has been pounded from above for days. Now it seems the assault from the ground is underway.
It's already the second day since the enemy broke into the plant. There are heavy, bloody battles.
But it's not just Ukrainian soldiers stuck in the sprawling tunnels and nuclear bunkers of this huge complex. More than 200 civilians are also thought to be sheltering there. Russia has announced a temporary ceasefire for a few hours each day to let.
We hope to continue rescuing people from Azovstal, from Mariupol. There are still civilians left there, women, children. To save them, we need to continue the ceasefire. We are ready to take part. It will just take time to lift people out of those basements, out of those underground shelters.
під землею.
Late last night, a group of evacuees did arrive in the town of Zaporizhia, but they were from the wider city, not the besieged steel, reported to be very slow and uneven, while movement north has been paused altogether. That could be because the Donbass is where many of Ukraine's best trained and most experienced soldiers are based, and they're digging in Donetsk. This war is as much about logistics as anything else, and both sides are drawing blood. Joe Inwood, BBC News, Lviv.
Well, at that Azovstal steel plant, it is a desperate and uneven them is Natalia Zaritska, who was pleading with the international community to help her husband and the other troops who are in that steelworks.
We ask everybody, please act, please do something to help.
The remnants of the factory and trying to get in, but they are well informed of a few floors underground, and they are fighting back. Both sides experiencing heavy losses. Yes, the horrible situation about it is that there are still a few hundred people underneath. They're trying to survive. We do know about the evacuation, the so-called evacuation corridors, and they have been working for a while. I mean, the other day they evacuated 18 buses. We were very anxious when only 3 buses managed to some of the people on the buses to the so-called filtration camps. They are trying to make sure that there are no military personnel amongst those who are trying to evacuate from the city. And just briefly, what is the wider situation? Because we've seen Russia in Luhansk and Donetsk republics, so they are intensifying their attacks from the Luhansk side and trying to encircle the forces that are that are still keeping control of the towns and villages in between the Donetsk and the
Woodland study, which indicates the season has moved forward by 3 weeks compared to the 1940s. In southern England, they've been laying their eggs earlier than ever. Now, scientists who have special permission to
47, and we're about to meet the newest generation.
Wow. How many are there?
So there are 8. So that's a very standard size for a great tit. Yeah. Now these parents have got a lot of work to do. They've got to find about 10,000 caterpillars.
Spring here.
The 75 years that we've been studying the tits here, we've seen quite a marked shift in the timing of egg laying. So they're now laying about 3 weeks earlier. The tits here are actually managing to track the other members of
Hello there. We've got an area of low pressure that's formed in the Andaman Sea. That's bringing widespread thundery showers to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. You can see all the cloud associated with those storms just here. And we're keeping a very close eye on for the next few days. Meanwhile, across the south of India, we've got a trough that's going to be bringing some heavy showers and thunderstorms over the next couple of days into central areas of Asia. We've got temperatures tending to climb across Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. We're looking at highs into the upper 20s, if not the low 30s in places. A few areas of haze, maybe 1 or 2 dust storms across Pakistan and the northwest of India, where we'll have some fairly gusty winds with us.
कल आज और कल में देश के हर पल में कल आज और कल में बनके दिल में साहस का एहसास बनके उम्मीदों को सच्चाई के रंग से सजाते हैं मुश्किलें कोई हरदम साथ निभाते हैं कल आज
1956 से आज तक LIC हर पल आपके साथ।
Nature, all powerful,
extracting mustard oil using completely natural methods, focusing only on purity and quality, and leaving the rest to nature. Because when we live in harmony with nature, life can be great.
The mustard specialist since 1933. Barso se sarso.
Have caused almost 15 million excess deaths worldwide. They include deaths caused directly by the virus as well as those caused indirectly because people couldn't get treatment for other illnesses like cancer. Ukrainian officials say fighting is taking have led to long queues at petrol stations, crippling financial problems, and a dire shortage of foreign reserves have led to calls for the government to resign. Japan's Prime Minister says Russia's actions in Ukraine amount to war crimes. He's been holding talks with Boris Johnson in London.
To tighten the straitjacket around the Russian economy by imposing a ban on Russian oil imports by the end of the year or next year in the case of Hungary and Slovakia. But Budapest has steadfastly opposed talk of an energy international spokesperson. So whose side is Hungary on? Sanctions that it intends to impose on Russia. Central to this is an oil embargo, which will be phased in over time for all member states. Hungary, it seems, would be given a little more time to stop using Russian oil.
Majority behind us just a couple of weeks ago. And it's telling that, we are dependent on Russian oil 65% when it arrives. And Russian gas, 84%. It's simply the hard physical facts on the ground. There is no substitute. Any such request, any such undertaking would result in the complete ruin of Hungarians' lives and the Hungarian economy's state.
You say you simply can't afford it, i.e. you're suggesting to me the proposal for an embargo, they are determined to make it work one way or another. Why can't you take that attitude?
Well, I presume it's very easy to make it black and white at your end, actually. The simple physical reality is that against the efforts of this government, as a matter of fact, for the past 12 years, which was aiming for energy diversification, simply there is no alternative. There's no other method to bring energy industry. Recently, we have made it very clear that the shortest period is about 3 to 4 years. Not to talk about the costs, which obviously are mounting. €500 million, $500 million US would be required actually to adjust.
Is that what you're going to do?
Shortly, yes. But at the end of the day, you have to, again, remember how the European Union works. The proposals coming from Brussels, and again, it's important to emphasize this is coming from Brussels, that is the economic system. So they exactly know that what they are proposing is against Hungarian interests, is against the possibility that is feasible on the ground. And if we do that, we completely are going to ruin Hungarian economy.
Well, many years of over-reliance on Russian energy. Are you prepared to say the same thing? Hungary has made a massive strategic mistake too, and it needs to put it right, yes?
Well, let me remind you that as a ago, you shouldn't mix up the reality today, because 10, 15 years ago, the strategic, the security situation of the continent was completely different. So decisions made then by Germany.
The important point, rely on Russia for energy in the last year.
Yeah, with a special regard to the fact that there was no other alternative and offer coming from the market. So let me finish my previous sentence, and that is, yes, indeed, and that's simply our fault that the alternative pipelines, as a matter of fact, those coming from Austria or those that are coming from the south, are either insufficient, actually, to provide for enough gas and oil for the Hungarian economy, or, as a matter of fact, coming from.
A very simple question. Be brief if you can. Are you going to pay, as Russia now demands that you do, for your oil and gas from Russia in rubles? The EU says you mustn't. That would be a breach of contract and a breach of sanctions. But your PM seems
energy. So on that, we cannot compromise.
So you're paying in rubles. See, it just seems on a whole host of these issues, the sanctions issue, the payment issue, and on the arming of Ukraine issue, you are completely out of step with.
Reason for that, we have about 150,000 Hungarians living just across the borders. As a matter of fact, the first airstrike has just happened at the Carpatha Ukrainian region this morning, yesterday. So we see how the war, for instance, went to the Ukraine. Don't ask something that the Hungarian electorate a couple of weeks ago clearly said no. I mean, the Hungarian electorate gave us a mandate.
I want to be clear what you mean when you talk about tens of thousands of Ukrainians in the process of that. They have committed egregious war crimes, which the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and the UN are investigating. And you are saying to Ukraine right now, you should stop fighting.
Activities, go to the tables, talk about how to reestablish peace in Ukraine. This is our neighbor. We exactly, again, know what is happening there, with a special regard to our fellow Hungarians there. And do support Ukraine, but not by military means.
You don't support Ukraine using military means to defend its territory?
That's right. That's not the decision of this Hungarian government, but it's the message on behalf of the Hungarian electorate. We have to respect it. That's been decided by the Hungarian electorate. Record high participation, record high mandate coming on behalf of the Hungarian electorate. This is simply the stance we have taken, and we have to stick to it.
See, I'm frankly amazed that you said Soviet tanks rolled in to put down our Hungarian revolution and met lion-hearted resistance. The occupiers won the fight on the streets, but they never could win people's hearts and minds. We must always remember the heroes of 50.
That I don't believe that from among two of us, I'm a historian, you or anybody else should be giving me a historical lesson or a moralizing lesson. You are representing a view and perspective that is coming thousands of miles away from. There is a difference between our perception how things should be handled and what the situation is, or rather how the situation should be can be resolved. And we just ask everyone, actually, with all due respect, accept the Hungarian stand being given to us. We have to stick to it.
I accord you that respect, and I know you're an historian. I also know you will have seen, just as I have, the pictures broadcast on Russian state media of Russian forces flying.
Take it as it is. The Hungarian stance will not change just because of a moralizing and opinion-like approaches and pressure that is coming on Hungary. We see that coming from many different angles, from the press, from the media, the Western European media.
And its security. Your neighbours in Poland have expressed deep, deep disappointment with your stand, your failure even as a government to condemn the mass killing of civilians in towns like. I advise him to see an eye doctor. The Poles used to be your allies. Now they're disgusted with you.
Well, you can cite as many citations as you want. I was standing by his side, actually, at the First International force on us a different standpoint that we have a mandate for.
It's my question. It's my job. It's my job to question you. It's my job to wonder, as we see the evidence from Mariupol, from Bucha, from a whole host of other towns and cities.
Not because of what you're suggesting, and that is your moralizing or media perspective.
No, it's not my moralizing. It's my discussion of facts with you.
Yes, we are aware of the facts, and we are aware again of the possibilities, if you like.
The president of Ukraine is some sort of enemy. I'm just wondering why Mr. Orban, after his election victory, said it was a triumph over the Brussels bureaucrats, the Soros empire, and he said the Ukrainian president. What did he mean by that? That there was direct meddling in Hungary's election by the Ukrainian government. You were asked to provide evidence, and you provide zero evidence. Where is that evidence?
No, the evidence is that our opposition, only what we are asking from everyone.
President Zelensky, Mr. Kovac, President
situation.
Zelensky has listened to everything that you say, that Viktor Orban says, and he's quite simple. He says Hungary, and in particular Mr. Orban, have to make a choice. They have to decide somehow representing the ethnic Hungarian population of the Carpathia region, and even in the long run, hoping that you might acquire some new territory.
Now we come to when there is a problem in your country, suggesting that Hungary has a different opinion or different interest in Ukraine is a lie, a flat lie that is not doing any good actually in the relationship of the two countries.
Yeah,
and with
well,
all due
you
respect,
told the EU Observer that
no control where they land.
Let's end with where this leaves Hungary, your stance on the Ukraine war. I've just talked about the way in which the Polish government appears disgusted with the stance you have taken. You've seen your ally in Slovenia recently lose.
And national interest-based approach is what the Hungarian stance is.
Right, but I only ask you whether you feel vulnerable. Sorry, Mr. Kovac, we're nearly out of time. I only ask you whether you feel vulnerable because, as you know, Brussels has launched.
Again, the use of words is very important. Punishing is not exactly what you would expect from a bureaucratic center of the European Union in face of the political realities on the ground, the will of the Hungarian people, and the Hungarian government's stance on these issues.
Joining me on Hard Talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
New Zealand, warm and dry. Some showers around southern southeastern parts of Australia, looking quite wet on Friday in Tasmania. We're also going to see some showers moving through northeastern parts of China, turning cooler here. Some downpours also into Vietnam. Strong to severe thunderstorms continuing to move further east across the USA. That's it for now. Bye-bye.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
कल आज और कल में देश साहस बनके दिल में साहस का एहसास बनके उम्मीदों को सच्चाई के रंग से सजाते हैं मुश्किलें कोई हरदम साथ निभाते हैं
Products that are typically not available for the retail market. We partner with companies that are used to ship in pallets and not individual items. Sustainability needs to be at the core of what you do, and that is actually a great link to our partnership.
Amul butter. Our global food system is food on BBC World News.
has made this plea.
I appeal to the world community to evacuate the civilians, and I appeal personally to the Supreme Commander to extract the wounded soldiers who suffer terrible pain dying from their wounds without the necessary treatment.
East, it came under Russian missile attacks last night as this war intensifies in the east.
Also on today's programme, the World Health Organization says the coronavirus pandemic caused almost 50... Hello and welcome to BBC News. Ukraine says Russian forces have launched an all-out assault on the steelworks in Mariupol and are trying to eliminate those defending the plant. Around 200 civilians are still believed to be sheltering inside.
Of this country. Last night, the city of Dnieper came under Russian missile strikes. A main bridge across this river was damaged, as well as a railway facility. Dnieper is a main logistics and humanitarian hub.
The Azovstal steelworks, where Ukrainian fighters are making their final stand, has been pounded from above for days. Now it seems the assault from the ground is underway.
It's already the second day since the enemy broke into the plant. There are heavy blood
escape. The Ukrainians say they want the same thing.
We hope to continue rescuing people from Azovstal, from Mariupol. There are still civilians left there, women, children. To save them, we need to...
Something to call a victory. It will free up thousands of Russian forces to take part in the assault on the Donbass. So far, progress south is reported to be very slow and uneven, while movement north has been paused altogether. Here in Lviv, where they targeted 3 electrical substations. They're trying to take out Ukraine's rail network and stop the flow of weapons from the west to the east. But it's not all going one way. Ukraine is said to have destroyed this huge Russian...
Yet another time, the Russians have not kept the promise of ceasefire and have not given an opportunity to the civilians who seek shelter from the fire in basements of the plant to evacuate. I appeal to the world community to evacuate the civilians.
Said to be trapped inside these steelworks, but they're not the only civilians caught in the front lines. In the Donbass in eastern Ukraine, where the fighting intensifies, many volunteers are now risking their lives to rescue people. But
to say. Thousands here are running the Russian gauntlet, trying to escape from the Kremlin's new offensive in eastern Ukraine. But imagine hand.
We've been going quite close to the front and evacuating quite a lot of bedridden people, a couple of blind people, people with Zimmer frames, people who otherwise maybe won't be reached by.
Friday, he left for a rescue mission and never came back. His daughter, Varvara, took to social media to beg for information. Please, bring my dad home, she said. By Russian forces who accused him of being a spy for the Ukrainian army. Then another surprise. While we're speaking to his wife, Yulia, her phone rings. It's her husband, still held captive. For others still trapped in the town of Popasna, no help at hand. This is as close as we can get to the town right now. You can hear the boom of artillery in the distance and some shells landing just the other side of this field. We've been told that all... Andrew Harding, BBC News in eastern Ukraine.
And while we've been on air, some breaking news has just come in that a United Nations representative says that another convoy to rescue some will update you on all the latest developments. But as our reporting has made clear day in, day out, capturing Mariupol is an absolutely crucial objective for Russia as it tries to secure a land bridge between the Donbass in eastern Ukraine and the Crimean...
Roads, railways and power stations in particular. Ukrainians repair what they can as soon as they can, desperate especially to keep supply routes open for weapons being brought in from the west.
We will find solution.
Often bridges have been targets. Sometimes the Ukrainians themselves have had to blow up their own bridges to stop Russian troops advancing. The Ukrainian government say around 300 bridges like this one.
We will deal with it, I mean, one step at a time. This is my philosophy right now. If I think about how huge the picture is and how huge the problem is and how so many things are out of our control because it depends on the crazy dictator Putin.
Yeah, Lisa, it's your questions answered. We're taking questions from viewers all around the world, and I'm going to be putting questions about the war here, what it's all about, where will it end, where's it going, to Justin Bronk from the Royal United Services Institute.
Do tune in because it's day 71 of this war, and still there are many, many questions about how long this war is going to go on and what are the key strategic objectives for President Putin. We're going to continue to follow all the developments, not just from here in Dnipro, but
Pandemic death toll in India is 10 times the official figure. We'll speak to one of India's top virologists who quit a key government panel after criticising Delhi's virus response.
LIC हर पल आपके साथ।
BBC experts check the facts behind the stories making the headlines. Go to the BBC News website and app
Staggering 15 million excess deaths occurred globally due to the COVID pandemic. The figure shows how many more people died than would have been expected based on previous year's death rates. Here's our global health correspondent, Naomi Grimley.
Directly from homes of victims. The government only counts related deaths of victims who die in a hospital.
The World Health Organization asked a panel of international experts to calculate the global. 1 million people died from COVID. But because of patchy testing, poor record keeping in some parts of the world, and the fact that some people died of non-COVID causes during lockdowns, the World Health Organization now thinks that figure.
We will miss the opportunity to be better prepared for the next time.
Some countries stand out. The estimate for excess deaths in Russia is 3.5 times.
Urgently, we need better data collection systems. It's a disgrace that people can be born and die and have no record of their passing. So we really need to invest in countries' registration systems so we can get accurate and timely data.
This report confirms.
Government on COVID-19. Welcome, Doctor, to the programme. I mean, that figure is staggering, 15 million globally, 4.7 million in India. We knew there'd been undercounting right around the world, but did we know by that much?
Science and Lancet that put the figure somewhere around 4 million. The second point is that the excess deaths in India is really consistent with the fatality rate around the world. Just released the 2020 figures, and the figures have been revised from about 149,000 deaths, COVID-related deaths in 2020 to about 525,000 deaths.
The government disputes the number, it disputes the methodology. Your view in terms of what the Indian government is saying?
Well, I see it very simply from the fact that in 2020, somebody I knew. So, I mean, anecdotal references like this tell me that certainly there was much more death and destruction in 2021 in the Delta wave than in 2020. What we should be doing, we should not be really glorifying whether more people died or less people died. What lessons did we learn? If we can't measure it, we can't fix it. It's as simple as that. And what we didn't do well. If so many people died, where did they die, in what period they died, so we can do better next time.
And was that partly why you chose to quit your position, part of the wider government team?
With COVID deaths.
Well, Doctor, we will leave it there. Dr. Shahid Jamil, thanks very much for talking to us here on BBC News. Thanks very much for your time. Now, let's turn to the United States because Johnny Depp, she is being sued by Johnny Depp for a multi-million-dollar defamation case brought by her former spouse. She's been giving more testimony. Let's listen in.
Johnny shoves me and kind of grabs me. Maybe this was the shove that I was talking about, but at some point, Johnny and I are in a struggle in the living room, and he kind of like shoves me down on the sofa, and I get up and I'm trying to get him off. And I think that was the first time I was like, is this a broken nose? At the time I was unsure what that feeling was, but I suspected I had a broken nose.
Amber Heard with the latest evidence in that defamation case. Before Ben Brown is here to answer all of your questions about this war here in a moment or two. Don't go away.
Hello there. We've got an area of low pressure that's formed in the Andaman Sea. That's northern Bay of Bengal, but nevertheless, that is a system we're keeping a very close eye on for the next few days. Meanwhile, across the south of India, we've got a trough that's going to be bringing some heavy showers and thunderstorms over the next couple of days into central areas of Asia. We've got temperatures Storms across the south of India, well, we've talked about those. We'll also see one or two showers develop across the far north of India. Some of those can be quite heavy, maybe with a bit of hail mixed in as well. Here's your outlook now over the next few days. Islamabad's temperatures creeping up again. Will
छप्पन से आज तक LIC हर पल आपके साथ।
कैसी हंसी मुस्कानों की धुन जिंदगी मक्खन।
She is warm, nurturing and loving. P-Mark mustard oil has always followed in nature's footsteps, extracting mustard oil using completely natural methods, focusing only on purity and quality, and leaving the rest to nature. Because when we live in harmony,
Hello, I'm Ross Atkins with Outside Source. This is the extraordinary story of climate change. Vaccines for Ukraine. Let's look at some of the international reactions.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of Your Questions Answered. It's on Ukraine and I am Ben Brown here in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. And you've been sending in your Centre for Russian, East European and Eurasian Studies at the University of Birmingham, and also an Associate Fellow at Chatham House. From Oxford, we are joined by the BBC's World Affairs editor, John Simpson, and our final guest.
The most preferable for us is that Russia is weakened to the point when she does not have an ability to continue the war. They pull back the troops and then we continue living in our beautiful country. But when you ask me about the time, rather than to a sprint as everybody thought before.
Isn't the most likely way that this war ends is some sort of peace negotiation over the territory that has already been taken by Russia, in which they keep some of the east of the...
You have seen what's happening in Mariupol. We don't want this to any of our citizens. We don't want this to anybody actually in the world to happen. This is why we will be fighting for these territories. This is why we will try not to get into any peaceful negotiations.
Okay, Kira, thank you very much indeed.
About 160 to 168 what are called battalion tactical groups that the regular Russian army can generate in peacetime and sustain. They deployed about 120 to Ukraine. If you look at the vehicle losses they've taken, confirmed, visually confirmed, about 3,500. More do that and cut off the JFO forces, which is looking increasingly unlikely, then they might be able to stabilize a new line of contact down from roughly Kharkiv up in the north down to Melitopol in the south, and then settle into a longer war of attrition. If they can't over the next 2 or 3 weeks, then the Russians face. So a lot depends on the next 2 weeks.
All right, Justin, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to our next question. It comes from Nigel in Somerset in the UK. Let's put this one to Katerina Volchuk. Why are oil and gas supplies?
Because countries like Germany are very dependent, and especially sort of the German economic might depends on stable and reliable energy supplies. And yet, despite this difficulty, the EU has been able to take this enormous to minimize their dependence. What was unthinkable 2 months ago? It's now possible.
Okay, Professor Katerina Volchuk, thank you for that. Let's go to John Simpson now, our World Affairs editor. This is a question for question, which I'm just adding in, John, is what if he doesn't succeed? What if he fails with this invasion?
Well, I don't actually think he is going to succeed, but at least not in the terms that he wants to. I think stand out permanently, so they lost some territory, but they kept their independence. I think that is the most likely outcome, but it could end in different ways. It could end with just a long start to use tactical nuclear weapons. To be honest, if that happens, then all bets are off, and I don't know where what might happen. But my guess is that that won't happen, that President Putin will declare victory. It's been a fantastic success.
All right, John, thank you very much indeed. Let's come back to my guest here in Kyiv and the Ukrainian Member of Parliament, Kira Rudik. This is a question from Mark in Ilkley. in other words, that are not at the centre of the fighting?
As you have seen, recently there were attacks on the western Ukrainian cities such as Lviv and the outskirts of Lviv. So Putin is telling us there is no normality. Everybody is trying to support our army the best we can and sending the product, support, whatever we can get to the front. We are getting a lot of refugees coming from the eastern parts to the western, and every Ukrainian is opening their
air power and the struggle for air power in this country at the moment.
So it's quite interesting that what are often reported as airstrikes throughout the country, including, as we've just heard, in Lviv and other parts of the west, as well as Kiev, are mostly cruise missiles. Long-range systems like their S-300s, which were somewhat attrited in the first week in particular, although they've had some resupply, but there are still batteries left, as well as, of course, a lot of SA-11s, 15s, and other sort of shorter and medium-range systems that are mobile and difficult for the Russians to hit. And so they've resorted to a lot of low-level attacks. And what we saw in terms of a lot of the airstrikes have been in cities that are very close to Russian-controlled airspace and at night, with unguided weapons at low level. So Mariupol, Kharkiv, artillery and ambushes. So the Russians have more ability to operate in the medium and high altitude area, but there they have to come low to have a battlefield effect because they don't have enough precision guided munitions and they have no targeting pods. So they have to come low where the manpads, so the shoulder fired systems, like, because Russia has a lot of SAM systems, both long range, medium and short range, as well as high altitude fighter patrols around their borders. So there's a sort of mutual airspace denial going on.
Okay. All right, Justin, thank you for that. Back to Katerina. Military willing to both invade and fight their previously peaceful neighbour, Ukraine, on Putin's behalf. And we've also had some questions asking whether Belarus civilians support their government's backing for Russia.
Situation because this war is unpopular. Belarusian people are very pacifist. They hate war because they were the battleground of the Second World War. So the war against Ukraine is very unpopular, and Lukashenko has to be very careful about antagonizing.
Right, so there is a huge difference between Russia and its actions and the internal situation in Belarus, because we have seen protests throughout the last 2 years in Belarus, and their opposition is going stronger and stronger, and there are even military in the same bucket. So Lukashenko will be very careful, and he will try to get a good bargain with Putin before he jumps into the war. They will continue firing missiles from Belarusian territory in his place.
Okay, Kira, thank you very much for that. Let's go back to John Simpson now, our World Affairs editor. This is a question from Susie Russell in France, and this is about allegations of war crimes and whether they're going to be investigated properly.
People, which he seems to have at the moment, and of course he's very strong at present, then there's absolutely no question of anything like that happening. But if you recall what happened in Serbia after what happened was that he was overthrown, and his successor then, in order to kind of reset the relationships with the West, then agreed to let Milosevic go to The Hague to be tried. There will be people within the political structure within Russia who will say this was all a terrible mistake, it was all his fault, and we must do something about it. You can never guarantee what might happen under those circumstances, but there is.
All right, John, thank you for that. Let's go back to Kira Rudik here, who is a member of the Ukrainian Parliament, leader of the Holos Party. Julie is asking, what will happen if Putin takes all of Ukraine, or at least significant?
Most of country, it would mean that most of Ukrainians are dead because we will resist, we will not let him happen. It will also mean that the Western world, who is supporting us, and you see the whole world, all democratic leaders.
Paul Whitlock, who wants to know, why doesn't Ukraine attack Russia behind Russia's military line so as to stop them bringing in reinforcements? Or maybe you think, Justin, they are already attacking the Russians behind their lines?
Reporting on a lot of these activities. But one of what we now know openly, one of the absolutely key activities which enabled Ukraine to defeat these thrusts down towards Kyiv from the northwest and northeast in the combat capability, because of course forces don't just require fuel, ammunition and food to advance. Actually, they need fuel, ammunition and food just to stay where they are, because there's a rate of consumption for forces that are forward, the Russian forces that are forward in east of Kharkiv, to try and cut off the Russians' main lines of supplies down from Belgorod and Belarus down towards Izium, which is the kind of axis of the Russian northern advance down towards Donbass, and also attacking around Kherson. Again, infiltrating the front lines where there's weakness, where Russian forces don't have enough forces to fully man their entire frontage, and then going after those supply lines is absolutely key, and it's something I'm sure Ukraine is doing on a large scale, potentially not just in Ukraine. There's an awful lot of bridges and...
Indeed, the Russian propaganda has been functioning on steroids for the last 2 months. So it's very difficult to escape it. And yet, if people want to find out what's going on, and they do, they actually, it's possible. And even the is very supportive, especially sort of from poorer areas outside Moscow, for example. And they are actually keen, they want to believe everything that is said about Russia, Ukraine, and the West. Who is the good guy and who is the sort of the villain? But even those explosions in various defense facilities across Russia. So it seems there are some sort of forces galvanizing, because we actually don't know who is behind those mysterious fires. The thing to watch is if and when mass mobilization.
Okay, thank you, Katerina, Professor Katerina Volchuk there from Birmingham University. And I want to thank my other guests as well, because we are out of time. Thanks to Justin Bronk from the Royal United Services Institute, who's been left behind by the Russian troops who were here for a few weeks trying to get to Kyiv after the invasion before they were driven back by Ukrainian forces. Homes, you can see there, completely destroyed. And from Kyiv.
Nature, all-powerful and uncompromising, a force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature, she is warm, nurturing and loving. P-Mark mustard oil has always followed in nature's footsteps, extracting mustard oil using completely natural methods, focusing only on purity and quality, and leaving the rest to nature.
निभाते हैं कल आज और कल में रहते हैं देश के हर पल में रहते हैं
1956
Dynamic, androgynous, he's now at the forefront of a new generation of progressive choreographers who are drawing new audiences to contemporary dance.
It is just extraordinary. Whatever their method, they only had one.
I understand the consequences of my decision. And one of the consequences of my decision was not going to Australia, and I was prepared not to go.
Journalists are under attack in ways that we've never experienced before.
Commander to extract the wounded soldiers who suffer terrible pain, dying from their wounds without the necessary treatment.
Vladimir Putin says Ukrainian fighters defending the steel plant must surrender, as the UN says a new convoy. The World Health Organization says the coronavirus pandemic caused almost 15 million excess deaths worldwide, triple the current estimate. And the actress Amber Heard says her ex-husband Johnny Depp slapped her repeatedly. The Ukrainian commander claims Russian troops have entered the tunnels under the site. They've also accused Russia of reneging on promises to allow civilians to get out. Vladimir Putin has said in the last hour the Russian army is still ready to give safe passage to civilians.
Indeed. the east of Ukraine, including Mariupol, that Russia is now focusing its most heaviest fire. We've heard from the deputy commander of the Azovstal steel plant that difficult and bloody battles are now underway.
Soldiers who are making superhuman efforts to contain the pressure of the enemy. The situation is extremely difficult, but no matter what, we continue to carry out the order to hold the defence.
In short, the fight for Azovstal will be a fight to the death. Ukrainians say they want the same thing.
We hope to continue rescuing people from Azovstal, from Mariupol. There are still civilians left there, women, children. To save them, we need to continue the ceasefire.
He did arrive in the town of Zaporizhia, but they were from the wider city, not the besieged steelworks. If the plant does fall, that will mean all of Mariupol is under Russian control, as well as giving President Putin something to together. That could be because the Donbass is where many of Ukraine's best trained and most experienced soldiers are based, and they're digging in. But this war isn't just taking place on the ground in the east. Yesterday, Russia... Both sides are drawing blood. Joe Inwood, BBC News, Lviv.
So what is the situation now inside this besieged complex? Let's watch a bit of a video said to have been shot from inside the steelworks.
Give us the opportunity to collect the bodies of fallen soldiers so that Ukrainians could say goodbye to their heroes, react appropriately to the critical situation in which the enemy doesn't observe any ethical norms, conventions or laws, killing people in front of the eyes of the whole.
That area of bunkers and tunnels sometime in the morning, and they hope to rescue more of the civilians trapped inside. Hundreds of civilians said to have been trapped there for many weeks, many of them women and children. Underlining of Ukraine.
Well, the greatest, every war is a war on children, and this war is no different. And so one of the really big concerns is the psychosocial impact on children's mental health. So even if they're, when they're moving, even if that can become quite serious later. Also then you need people who are trained to spot children who have more severe trauma, of course, if they've experienced the likes of things that they experienced in Mariupol. These children will need a lot more intense.
Yet so many families, including many small children, are trapped behind front lines where they can't be reached, where they continue to suffer this deepening trauma.
So that is one of the big issues, right? So we know that there's still several thousand children trapped in Mariupol, and can bring those children out to safety.
And that means what? So you want to ensure that you will not come under Russian fire, Ukrainian fire? What is blocking the access?
Yeah, so if there's not a break in the active conflict, if there's not an agreed ceasefire.
Agencies for a humanitarian ceasefire, they simply are so hard to achieve. You've come now to Dnipro. You're going to travel even further east. Is that because you're trying as much as you can to work under the existing conditions, as hard as they are?
Well, that's exactly right. Things, and also some educational kits as well, because particularly the children who are in Mariupol, they have had no access to schooling for the last 2 months because, of course, the internet was cut off. So we want to try and get those children some means of
that you're able to conduct here.
I'm sorry.
Your aid projects are growing.
Yes, they are growing, and so essentially, we're a worldwide movement for children, and we have the whole weight of the movement behind this response in Ukraine. So we have over 100 million. We are bringing people from our country offices all over the world. So we have met colleagues from Nepal, from Indonesia, from Rwanda here. So they're all showing their solidarity with Ukrainian children, and all doing the best they can to help.
Among Ukrainian and international organizations, all of them in one voice calling for greater humanitarian access, but most of all the kind of a ceasefire that can allow them to get access to those areas where so many, including many children, remain. happened, the invasion of this country. What is clear now is that as this war drags on, in a way that, of course, has not just surprised the world and upended their conventional thinking about Russia's military might, is that Russia itself, intensification of fighting, it remains the key strategic objective for the Russian leader, for his forces. And of course, all eyes now on May the 9th, the traditionally huge military parade in Russia. Lots of talk of Russia's. But there's no sign of an end to this war, Matthew, not yet.
Lise, thanks very much. Lise Doucette there in Dnipro, and thanks to her and all of our teams right across Ukraine. Now, still to come here on today's Global, we'll look at the fate of the Afghans who worked with NATO forces before the Taliban took over. As a British general tells us, they've effectively been abandoned and left in danger.
We have families who have been in hiding in Afghanistan since September last year.
Nature, all-powerful and uncompromising, a force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature,
Our global health correspondent, Naomi Grimley.
In the global chaos of COVID, makeshift funeral pyres and hasty burials around the world have become all too familiar. But have some countries undercounted the number of lives lost to the pandemic?
50% of deaths are not rated deaths of victims who die in a hospital.
The World Health Organization asked a panel of international experts to calculate the global death toll due to the crisis. And the fact that some people died of non-COVID causes during lockdowns, the World Health Organization now thinks that figure might be more like 15 million.
It's a tragedy. This is a staggering number. Count, we will miss the opportunity to be better prepared for the next time.
Some countries stand out. The estimate for excess deaths in Russia is 3.5.
Case that people can be born and die and have no record of their passing. So we really need to invest in countries' registration systems so we can get accurate and timely data.
This report confirms that places such as the US, Britain, Spain and Germany.
Thousands of Afghans who worked with NATO forces. Well, now a former British Army boss says the UK should feel deeply ashamed for not fully delivering on its promise to relocate 20,000 Afghans to the UK. General John McCall, who served
McCall, just a bit of background on him. He was the UK's Special Envoy to Afghanistan between 2005 and 2007. Prior to that, he worked for ISAF. He was in liaison with Hamid Karzai, the then president, regularly. So he was very alongside the NATO forces out there as interpreters in the embassies, giving them legal advice, anything that they needed. Now, you may remember that Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, had said in September last year that those individuals will be looked after and they...
In cellars, every day, every hour of every day, in peril, worried for the safety of themselves and their families. And we have a system which is incapable of helping them. And if that was the case, if I was a minister...
Clearly busy at the moment. There's a war in Ukraine. We've come off the back of the pandemic and that mistakes and delays are inevitable. And he said there was no excuse, that this was something that was promised, and he felt that the government had to act up and sort it out now.
Doing a quick bit of maths.
Some of them living a very difficult, perilous life at the moment.
Seema Katecha, thanks very much. Thank you. Now let's take a look at a couple of other stories making the headlines today, because fresh shortages of fuel in Sri Lanka have led to consumer prices in Turkey have soared nearly 70% in April, from a year ago, hitting a 2 decades high. Transport, food prices and household furnishings recorded the sharpest rise in annual inflation. Experts report how Turkey's rescuers in central China have pulled a woman alive from the rubble of a 6-story building 6 days after it collapsed. She was conscious and advised rescuers how to bring her out safely, according to state media. The authorities say. Now let's turn to the US, where the actress Amber Heard is giving more testimony for the second day in that defamation trial brought by her ex-husband Johnny Depp. On Wednesday, she said Mr. Depp slapped her.
And he slaps my face. And his friend is in our proximity. And it didn't hurt my face. It just
Him. In his testimony, Johnny Depp denied any wrongdoing. Now, just time to show you some pictures that we've received, because armed wildlife officers in Kenya were called to deal with the bag. It did have a realistic image of a big cat printed on it. The shopping bag was directly below a window, and when it was opened, the officials realised that the supposed lion, well, it didn't have the rest of its body, and in fact was that shopping bag the latest lines, because Vladimir Putin has said in the last hour or so that Russia is ready to provide safe passage for civilians out of the Azov-style steel plant in Mariupol. Of course, that disputed by the fighters there inside. He said those fighters tomorrow morning. More here in just a moment.
Hello there. We've got an area of low pressure that's formed in the Andaman Sea. That's bringing widespread thundery showers to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. You can see some heavy showers and thunderstorms over the next couple of days into central areas of Asia. We've got temperatures tending to climb across Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. We're looking at highs into the upper 20s, if not the low 30s in places. A few areas, 1 or 2 showers develop across the far north of India. Some of those could be quite heavy, maybe with a bit of hail mixed in as well. Here's your outlook now over the next few days. Islamabad, temperatures creeping up again. We're looking at highs up to 42 degrees Celsius into the middle of next week. So
aligns with nature. She is warm, nurturing and loving. B-Mark mustard oil has always followed in nature's footsteps, extracting mustard oil using completely natural methods, focusing only on purity and quality and leaving the rest to nature. Because
caused by pandemic disruption has hit the country's largest car manufacturer, with production plummeting.
The fragility of the global supply chain has been exposed by a combination of factors, and it's being felt across the world.
Hello, I'm Ross Atkins with Outside Source. This is the extraordinary story of climate change. Vaccines, Ukraine. Let's look at some of the international reaction. Tell us what you've been hearing. In practical terms, what does that mean? And let's just remind ourselves, this is all part of the same story.
Piece the story together.
This is BBC World News. Our main headlines here. The Ukrainian army says Russia is trying to eliminate those defending the steel plant in Mariupol, where 200 civilians are still trapped. The Kremlin, though, denies launching a full-scale assault on the last stronghold. And Japan's Prime Minister says Russia's actions in Ukraine amount to war crimes. He's been holding talks with Boris Johnson in London. The two Prime Ministers have agreed a new defence partnership.
Life inside of them, their life inside of you, is gone. It's estimated that around 1 in 5 pregnancies end in miscarriage. I am one of tens of millions of women around the world who have suffered pregnancy loss. And as my work as global health correspondent has shown me many times, how physically and mentally painful miscarriage can be, why aren't we talking about it more? Why don't we know more about why it happens?
So my name's Professor Siobhan Quemby.
My name's Natasha Nakati.
Mera naam Ruxana hai.
I've heard from one group, often left out of the conversation.
My wife was near to die.
You know, I'd cry sitting on the toilet because that was the only time I could get to be alone.
Baby, born silent. The beautiful shoes, bought for stillborn baby Jenny on what would have been her second birthday.
This Still Parents exhibition here at Manchester's
Its own outside the womb.
Whatever you call this type of loss, and no matter what point in pregnancy it happens, it can be a life-changing event. For the mums and families who contributed to get that chance, we're often told that miscarriage is just a part of life. Move on, try again. It wasn't meant to be. But a recent study suggests millions of women around the world are potentially spending years. Back in January, I went to a very special event in Edinburgh.
As you walk with your lanterns, we hope you're able to find some light in the dark, and we'll be walking in memory of your baby that died.
Stress disorder and anxiety.
Data on miscarriage and its impact is vague, as losses are not officially counted in most countries, and it's still seen as taboo in many parts of the world, so millions of women end up suffering.
I couldn't sleep. I would lay awake and pray to Allah to make everything okay.
I had lost something that I wanted really badly. So I remember one night it was raining outside and I was just in my bed.
I was very depressed.
Research carried out at 3 London hospitals suggests nearly 1 in 3 women suffered post-traumatic stress.
What actually happened to them, perhaps, I think it can be incredibly destructive. At the moment, screening isn't happening, and I think people are constantly slipping through the net. And I think being unwell for a number of years, it differs, throughout the world. I think that the
potential solution being developed by Professor Bourne and his team to try and make what can be a very traumatic experience more bearable.
This is a virtual reality headset that we are offering women who need to have a procedure to.
Has just started trialling this new kit. She's also doing a study looking into how other activities like playing Tetris or listening to a podcast might help.
We're looking to see if brief cognitive task shortly after a traumatic event can target specifically intrusive memories and flashbacks, and whether that can prevent the development not only of those distressing symptoms in and of themselves, but other psychological problems.
As night falls in Edinburgh, each lantern for each life lost.
And most of all, there's been acknowledgement, recognition of these precious lives that have been lost.
For Kelly, this walk is part of her healing process.
I feel as though he's with me when I come to these. I feel close to him. I know he's with me.
Answer, myself included, and that can make the healing process even harder.
The causes of miscarriage are not well understood. Most happen in the first 3 months of pregnancy, and around half of those are due to genetics.
It's even more opaque. What researchers are increasingly finding, though, is that Black and Asian women are at higher risk of miscarriage. Black women in particular are 40% more likely to suffer a loss than white women, according to one research.
It's really emotional. I'm just trying to contain myself now.
They lost their previous pregnancy at 4 months last March. This baby is doing well, and they're being supported.
I was sure there's something wrong. And I remember being laughed, from one of the staff nurses and saying, just go home. Why do you keep coming? Just take, it's not from here. You can wait.
There is very little doctors can do to save a baby at this stage in pregnancy, but the feeling of not being listened to is what has stayed with Isabel.
Shock to me, and then to lose a baby and then have to bury a baby, that was just unimaginable.
Natasha says she also didn't feel heard by some clinicians and says urgent research is needed to understand. It's not just in the UK where there are these concerns. Like Isabel, these women in the US have also felt belittled and ignored. They call themselves sisters in loss.
Hi there. Hi.
Natrice told me she was inconsolable when she was scanned and told there was no heartbeat.
I just, collapsed. I got sick right there. And then she asked me, why are you throwing up? Did you come in here sick? And I had to take a heartbeat. So there was no compassion.
I woke up, was having really bad back pain, and I was told by my doctor when I called that I was just constipated. They told me to come back in a few hours for an ultrasound.
Absolutely, yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, it really is a struggle all around when it comes to our maternal care.
I've come to Queen Charlotte's and Chelsea Hospital here in West London, which sees many black and ethnic minority patients, to try and get a
Obstetricians and Gynecologists Race Equality Task Force.
Unfortunately, black women have a number of factors associated with the risk of miscarriage overrepresented. So, for example, they are more likely to have
previous pregnancy losses.
She's also a leading researcher in this field, which is notoriously underfunded. She's currently trying to raise money to investigate some of the many unknowns around why black women are at higher risk, including looking into any potential
and preterm birth. So that's another area we can look at.
Researchers don't know if black women in African countries, for example, are also at greater risk. The data is simply not collected.
There's clearly a myriad of complex, deeply traumatised. I've been hearing from partners all around the world, starting with Amir Sangal in Karachi, Pakistan.
At first, I did not know what to do because
Oksana, who we heard from earlier, suffered 3 miscarriages and 1 ectopic pregnancy, where the embryo starts growing outside the womb. They now have 2 little daughters, but they said it's very difficult to be open about pregnancy loss.
About miscarriage. I'm sharing my story with the world now in the hope it might benefit someone else.
Amir is not the only one opening up about his losses. More than 5,000 kilometres away in Malawi, Sisomo Mwadi is... In the UK, men who have experienced pregnancy and baby loss are increasingly finding each other and starting up support communities. These men have all lost babies, and they share their grief through football.
Quite rightly, on the woman. Support for women is patchy across the world, and many women don't get any support at all during or after a miscarriage. But for men, support is practically non-existent everywhere.
We don't all kind of sit around and discuss.
You're listening to the Dad Still Standing podcast, and we're about miscarriage, about stillbirth, about baby loss.
2 of the football players have also set up a podcast where they're increasingly hearing from people all around the world.
So we're going to be talking to Raul Navarro Jr.
who might be secretly struggling. Many people choose not to talk about their losses, but it's about having the opportunity to, if and when needed.
What's the worst that can happen? We can't make anybody feel worse about what they've gone through, but actually we can make a lot of people feel...
Eking out has helped them to move forward.
It's not the case for everyone, but most people who suffer a miscarriage will go on to have a healthy pregnancy. Sadly though, the more miscarriages you have, the more likely you are to have.
It's been 2 months since we met Isabel, as she had a scan at University Hospital Coventry after losing 2 previous pregnancies. And it's wonderful news.
It's the gift I've been asking, be able to hold my son in my arms, alive, so.
Little Angelo has arrived safe and well.
So when although Angelo is a month old today, it just marked on Monday that we lost Andre a year ago. So it's been,
But that's not the case. There are answers and treatments out there. We just need to properly research them to find them. Nobody knows what their pregnancy journey is going to look like, or whether they will be able
on this journey. Opening up though, being honest about the good, the bad, the joyous and the painful experiences of pregnancy loss, all of us can perhaps feel a little less alone.
नए रंग में ढला ये मेरा चीज है, ये मेरा चीज है, ये आते हैं मुश्किलें कोई हरदम साथ निभाते हैं, कल आज और कल में रहते हैं, देश के हर
only on purity and quality and leaving the rest to nature.